Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Iceberg podcast, brought to you as always by Inside the Penguins, a proud affiliate of the Hockey News. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. And, well, the big thing and the big news of the week is we finally have the two teams that will participate for the Stanley Cup final. We'll have our picks, our predictions, and our breakdown coming on Thursday's episode of the Tip of the Iceberg. But for today, we're going to stay strictly Pittsburgh Penguins. We're going to kick it off with a veteran defenseman heading over to the KHL, so his services are no longer going to be used by the Pittsburgh Penguins, but that's all right. They added 3 forwards yesterday at the American Hockey League level with 3 very, obvious connections to the Penguins organization. And then we'll close things out with our weekly Pens poll, an interesting discussion about moving one guy in and bringing one guy out into the Pittsburgh Penguins organization at both forward, defense, and goaltender as well. But let's kick things off with the biggest piece of news, I think we should say, from yesterday, and that is a veteran defenseman, Xavier Ouellet, signing with Dynamo Minsk of the KHL. Ouellet played the last 2 seasons with the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins at the American Hockey League level, playing in 92 games, scoring 42 points. His last NHL action wasn't since 2020-21 with the Montreal Canadiens. So I think the writing was on the wall here for Ouellet, and he took the opportunity to go play professionally back in, not in Russia, in Belarus, but for the Continental Hockey League, which is primarily in Russia.
Yes, he joined the KHL. I don't know I forget where he played before any of all that, but had a decent NHL career for himself coming into the Penguins organization, and just couldn't get past the humps of being down the depth chart for this Penguins team. I think I always gave him a little bit more of a boost than he may have, I don't want to say deserved, because he has NHL experience, but then he was getting from the team himself. His closest chance may have come last year, whenever the Penguins were getting down the stretch of the season almost, but we're getting some pretty bad injury troubles on the blue line. Hextall said, I believe it was around the deadline or wherever it may have been, that because he didn't get an exit interview really, but Ron Hextall said that Ouellet would have been a guy to come up and fill in those voids, except he himself was also injured, and that's why we had Taylor Fedun for a handful of games last year. So that may have been his best shot. Obviously, he wasn't going to get it this past year, considering the defense stayed relatively healthy. It was also kind of revamped. There were other names flying in and out. I mean, Jack Rathbone probably added to the depth ahead of him, and so did a bunch of other names. So it just likely wasn't going to happen for him. End of the deal. He doesn't get a crack at the NHL. He was on an NHL contract, I think. I mean, he could have played. So, yep, that's just that. And at the age of 30, you just know you're not going to fit in the Penguins organization right now, especially if you're not getting NHL playing time. And also not even testing the waters of free agency. He must have just known that was it for him on this side of the pond. So, yeah. And these guys like playing. He's still young enough to cut it and play. He's probably going to play really well over in the KHL because a lot of guys will go do that. So, I guess happy trails to him and hope for the best in his future. It's hard that, like I said, I wished he could have gotten more chance at the Penguins organization, but such is depth.
Yeah, when the Penguins first signed him, I think both of us were like, well, I mean, that's a name that we recognize. Like, we'll see what he's like as a depth piece, but he like you mentioned, he never got his opportunity. And at this point, when you're 30 years old, as you mentioned, the new general manager is constantly talking about, we need to get younger. We need to get younger. I think at that point you look around and you say, well, that means I'm not part of the future plan. Not that I was part of the present plan. So it makes sense that he saw the writing on the wall and said, you know what? My opportunity is going to be less limited if I go over to the KHL. So he signs a contract with Dynamo Minsk. And this brings up a very interesting question, and this will lead into our second part of this episode. But do you think that we're going to see a similar youth movement at the American Hockey League level? We've already kind of started to see that. But last year, this is a team that had a lot of, quote, veteran players at the American Hockey League level. They had to sit some guys simply because they had too many veterans. You're talking Radim Zahornas, Ouellet was part of that. Taylor Fedun was part of that. Mark Friedman at the beginning of the year was part of that as well. Vinny Hinostroza. Do we think that this year it's going to be a lot of younger players and they're not really going to have to test that limit of, I think it's 6 or 7 players that are considered veterans by the American Hockey League?
I would think so, because they're trying to build a. You have to remember they're still looking for a coach down there. They're still
Yeah.
trying to build the premier development group for the Penguins, and whenever the word development gets thrown in there, you're not going to see a lot of guys over the age of 30 or even 28, 29. You're going to see those youngsters like those three kids that they just signed that are, I believe, 20, 20, and 21. Like
Yeah.
they're young. So there's going to be a bright future. I don't want to necessarily call it a youth movement because
The
it
American Hockey
no,
League, it's
it
a
is
lot of youth anyway.
yeah, there's already a lot of youth there. Uh, but you just feel like the veteran presence is going to be declining a bit for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins because, I mean, for quite a few seasons under Ron Hextall and before him, that's kind of all that was down there was some veteran presence and middling prospects that really didn't go anywhere.
Mhm.
I mean, such as life-chasing Stanley Cups every season. But now with the future a bit more at the forefront of the focus for this team, it's they're going to have to fill it with the youth. And I think these three signings that we'll discuss shortly, I'm sure, um, they're not top names. They're not going to blow your prospect pool out of the water. They're not going to add the kind of pieces that this Penguins prospect pool needed. No, they're not going to do that. But they could be useful names down the line, considering these numbers look good in their with their junior teams, and
Mhm.
now they'll be part of what could be the foundation of a youth movement at the AHL level.
Yeah, and we'll get to those guys in just a minute. But I mean, even outside the three signings that Wilkes-Barre Scranton made yesterday, you have guys like Ville Koivunen, who the Penguins expect to come over to North America full time next season, or at the very least, they've mentioned that they want him to do that and fight for an NHL roster spot. If he doesn't make it, then likely he starts at the American Hockey League level. And then you bring guys over like Vasily Ponomarev, who was already playing at the American Hockey League level. And the same thing goes for him. He's going to vie for an NHL roster spot. There's a chance that, I mean, there's not going to be that many spots available for these 3 or 4 or 5 forwards. So some of them are going to have to play at the beginning of the season at the American Hockey League level. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for guys like that. Even Poulan, if he doesn't make the roster out of camp, he's going to start probably as the first line center down there. Jonathan Gruden is included in that. A guy like Tristan Brose, is he going to come up and start his professional career next year at the American Hockey League level? So even at the top end of the prospect system, everybody seems to be converging upon, Northeastern Pennsylvania. And that is a good thing for the Penguins because you're going to get these guys to grow together. And that at the end of the day should help you in the long run, especially for a team that, more in the near future than not, it's going to be a rebuild. And there's going to be a lot of opportunity for younger players. There's getting more and more as the time goes on. But as of right now, you still look at the Penguins' top 6, and Malkin and Crosby aren't going anywhere. So centers are going to have to fit in as a bottom 6 role. Brian Rust and Michael Bunting aren't going anywhere for the next couple of seasons. Ricard Raquel, he might be moved. He might be on the trade block. But at the end of the day, he still has 4 years left on that contract. And then you look at a guy like Drew O'Connor, it seems like he is really setting himself up for a long-term future, or at the very least the next, handful of seasons in the Penguins' top 6. So there's not a lot of opportunity at the present moment, but if you look 3-4 years down the road, a lot of those spaces are going to become open. So guys like Ponomarev, Koivunen, Jaeger, who we haven't brought up yet, they're going to be there. And if they can get to the American Hockey League level and acclimate themselves to professional hockey and playing against men a little bit more, some of these junior guys especially, then it's only going to be a positive thing. So I think the sooner they start that movement, the better. And I think you see that Kyle Dubas has mentioned on several occasions, it kind of leans towards the fact that that's exactly what they're going to do going forward.
That's exactly what they should do. It's just that time to start focusing
Mm-hmm.
on that sort of thing. And you're right, they are going to start learning the system together. And not only they start learning the system together, like I mentioned before, they're going to be learning it with a new head coach too, with a new face that is going to likely have familiarity or at least be following in what instructions are he's being given from above.
Yeah.
But that's okay because again, it is about making this the premier development system for the Penguins, and a new face that's a good head coach for them. They're already 3 skilled forwards. And who knows? Maybe Owen Pickering starts over here. Maybe some of these other names start to get sent to Northeastern PA and start growing in the system. It's going to be, once again, another interesting season to watch. I feel like it won't be as entertaining, or at least I should say as important to keep an eye on as this past season was, when it came down to there's a ton of veterans going in here and they're teaching some of the top prospects in terms of Sam Poulin, Valtteri Puustinen, Drew O'Connor was thought to maybe be there to start, but obviously we see what happened. And then obviously Jonathan Gruden getting a good deal. And then what turned into Jack St. Ivany coming up. There's a good feeder system already there. It just now needs that beef to really get it over the hump. And it's starting to really grow. And this is a good sign of it.
Yeah, and we talked about the couple of signings that were made. Let's get to that right now. The Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins made 3 signings, all 3 forwards yesterday, and all 3, pretty productive with their junior teams, as you mentioned. Wilkes-Barre signed Atlee Calvert of the Moose Jaw Warriors, Gabe Klassen of the Portland Winterhawks, and Jack Beck of the, wait for it, the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds. Check that one off the Kyle Dubas bingo card for the offseason, bringing in somebody from the Sioux. So 3 forwards that, like I mentioned, all having very, very productive seasons. 2 of them at the WHL level and one of them at the OHL level, and that's Jack Beck. But what did you think of bringing in 3 forwards that have high scoring potential, all, as you mentioned, around the age of 21?
It's a good start to building that ground of, we're trying to find skill guys. We're trying to feed into high offense, high octane into the future. I know Kyle Dubas is still trying to implement a ton of analytics stuff. So maybe these guys have good analytical numbers that we just don't know because they don't track that. They don't obviously track that sort of thing for minor league hockey, or junior hockey, I should say. I think the big one that stands out the most, to me at least, is Atlee Calvert when it comes to, he has that familiarity with Braden Yeager and being part of the team that won that organization's Moose Jaw Warriors' first WHL championship and reaching the Memorial Cup for the first time ever. Just that sort of familiarity. I don't know exactly if they shared a line or how much they played together specifically, but I mean, just being on the same team at that level, at that age, and having that much success is enough to know that you two are going to be close. And then once this starts to kick off for them, there will be an extra level of ease and comfort coming in. And Atlee Calvert was at the prospect tournament for the Penguins last year. So there's a little bit of familiarity there with the organization as well, and with guys like Kyle Dubas and the front office staff. So I think that was an easy one to bring in. Maybe the Penguins just kept their eye on him the entire time, which is extremely possible. And again, like I said, they won't, Calvert and Yeager won't play together at the AHL level, but sharing maybe another prospect challenge, maybe some development camps, and then going into training camp, if they're all still there together, again, there's that ease, there's that level of familiarity. And then whenever push does come to shove and Braden Yeager does reach the Penguins organization full time, there's that face there that he can go on to and be with for that situation. You told me yesterday it's like the Felix Robert for I believe it was Sam Poulin. I believe it was Sam Poulin and Nathan Legaredo. They were both teammates with him. Were they not? No, just him?
No. Robert was a teammate with Sam Poulin with the Sherbrooke Phoenix, and then Poulin and Legare played together when they got traded to Val d'Or.
There it is. That's the connection. But yeah, it's a little bit of that again, and it's always good to have that sort of ease coming into the NHL whenever you're a 20-year-old.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting as well because Atlee Calvert is the name that is most recognizable because a lot of Penguins fans followed along with Moose Jaw this year simply because of Braden Yeager and the excitement surrounding the 2023 first-round pick. But Calvert put up 47 goals and 95 points this year. Like, yes, it is the WHL. I'm not expecting this guy to lead the American Hockey League in points next year, but you're betting on a lot of upside and a lot of talent. And I think that goes for the other 2 guys as well. I mean, you look at Gabe Klassen, somebody else they sniped from the WHL Championship Series. Obviously, the Penguins were keeping a close eye on that series because of Braden Yeager and probably because of Atlee Calvert as well, knowing that they had, prior history with him coming over to the organization and training. But Gabe Klassen was on that Portland Winterhawks team that went to the WHL finals. And while, it was a tough series for them, Klassen had 35 goals and 106 points in the regular season. So a lot of talent is being brought in by the Penguins right now. And not all of these guys are going to start at the American Hockey League. They're not guaranteed spots at the AHL level, but these are young players with a lot of offensive upside that you're bringing in and seeing if they work. Because when you sign 3 of them, odds are, if your prospect development system from the coaching standpoint is good, odds are one of them is going to turn into something valuable, hopefully at the NHL level. But at the very least, you're getting 3 guys that are going to be battling it out for American Hockey League ice time. And it's also going to push guys like Lucas Svedkovsky, who has kind of been in kind of a purgatory at the minor league levels between the ECHL and the AAHL level. He hasn't really been able to take that next step. Bringing in guys like this is just, 1, giving yourself more opportunity to hit on a long shot prospect, and 2, pushing some of these other guys that are in the organization that need to take that next step, like a Svedkovsky, like I'm blanking on, other names to potentially bring up. But I mean, if they do it on the defensive side, like a guy like Isaac Beliveau.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially Isaac Beliveau, who I can remember they signed to a deal right around the trade deadline last year. The only reason I remember that is because we were waiting for trades to happen and Hextall dropped a contract on us.
Yeah.
He's one of those guys that can absolutely he's in that purgatory right now. Maybe was just shoved to the back of the line because of the amount of veteran presence that Kyle Dubas had brought in. Don't forget, too, I mean, he just signed it. We don't know exactly where he fits. Maybe he starts in the NHL level. Philip Krull is still down there. The new signing from the Leafs organization coming back to North America. Maybe he's got some fighting to do. Defense, I know, but part of that name. When it comes to those forwards, though, it's a little thinner. The line is a little thinner when it comes to who's going to make that sort of jump down the line, down the years a bit. Just kind of looking through, it's Lucas Svedkovsky stands out. We'll see what Tristan Burroughs can do in his time and his start with the Penguins organization. I felt Terry Puslin's kind of already cemented himself. They're expecting big things from Poulin and Gruden. I don't know how much they're actually expecting from Unikopinen. That's just a name that's they pulled up every so
veteran
often.
Presence. Yeah.
Yeah, the 26-year-old's the veteran presence.
Yeah.
Mark Johnstone also still has a year left. Again, they're probably not expecting much, but again, another veteran presence name down there that is under the age of 30 and not Vinny Hinostroza, who was 29 going on 30 last year. So there are some interesting names to keep an eye on, and a slim, much less NHL experience, which might also be an okay thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be taking some bets, and that's the thing. Kyle Dubas is going to be gambling a little bit, and that's all these signings are. They're gambles, but at the same time, you're not putting a lot of stock into them. They're American Hockey League contracts, and if they work out, then that's great. Then a team that doesn't have their first-round pick this year, that didn't get a first-round pick back in the Jake Gensel trade, if you get these guys, and maybe not at the same exact timeline of a first-rounder, but if they eventually turn out to be a solid bottom 6 piece, or, surprise everybody and kind of surpass expectations, become a top 6 piece for the Penguins in the future, then it was a good gamble and it was worth it because it's very low risk. So, Kyle Dubas bringing in guys with high upside, guys that have very stuffed stat sheets in the OHL this year and the WHL this year. So I'm intrigued to see, where they start the season, who they're paired with. But like we mentioned, a lot of points in these 3 guys. 95 for Calvert, 106 for Klassen, and 85 points for Jack Beck.
Yeah.
In the OHL, which is a little bit of a different atmosphere than the WHL. I feel like there's a little bit less as far as offense coming from the OHL, just in general, among the 3 CHL leagues. But let's close this thing out with some NHL talk, because the Pittsburgh Penguins, they're a little under a month away from the start of free agency. They still have about $9 million, give or take, in salary cap space if you bring up certain players like a Sam Poulin, like a Jonathan Gruden, to try to fill out the roster spots. But they have more than that if they want to send one of those guys down. But there's a couple of scenarios that I threw out there yesterday as far as our weekly Pens poll is considered, and wanted to know your opinion, the listener, the follower. What did you think of these 3 scenarios, and which one would you rather see? You could trade Tristan Jarry and in return acquire goaltender Linus Ullmark. That came away with 42% of the overall vote, both on Twitter and on our YouTube channel at Inside the Penguins. Combined, it was 42%, and that one barely squeaks by trading Ryan Graves and signing back Brady Shea of the Carolina Hurricanes. That one had 38% of the vote. And then the third and final one was trade Riley Smith and sign Tyler Bertuzzi. That came away with 20% of the overall vote. Of these three options, Horwat, which one would you most likely, or not most likely, which one would you rather see?
I'm going to have to go with the trade Ryan Graves and sign Ryan Shea.
Brady Shea.
Brady Shea, thank you.
Yeah.
Ryan Shea played for the Penguins last year. Great. Trying to organize Ryan Graves, Ryan Shea, and Riley Smith in my head. These last few days has been unreal. But yes, I would go with the Graves and Shea option just because, first of all, that'd be you finding a way out of Ryan Graves immediately. I mean, it's not that I believe this will happen, but it's already kind of been looking like Ryan Graves won't work out. We'll see what the next year brings if he sticks around, but if you're able to just find a way to drop it, maybe take on another deal, who knows exactly how it works, but bring in someone a bit more cemented in who they are as in a Brady Shea, who has that good experience with a couple different teams. I don't know too much about him yet, but I just feel like that's a good option to take away from what was a disaster of a season from Ryan Graves.
I'm still of the belief that it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to move on from Ryan Graves this summer. So with that said, my vote went to trading Tristan Jarry and bringing in Linus Ullmark. I also think it would be the most significant move. Yes, I understand Ryan Graves, when it comes down to it, was a much worse asset last year than Tristan Jarry was, simply because Tristan Jarry was fantastic up until January 1st. He was very good. And there was a part of the season where we were on this very show saying that Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic were one of the best goaltending duos in the National Hockey League because they were standing on their head. The defense wasn't helping them out, and Ryan Graves was a big part of why they needed to stand on their head. So I understand that. But at the same time, I think there was, one, more of a market for Tristan Jarry, and two, I think in the long run, this move helps out the Penguins. I mean, Ullmark has 1 year left on his current deal at $5 million. So if you're able to pull this off, which is a lot of moving pieces here, being able to trade Jarry and then being able to trade for Linus Ullmark in a league where goaltenders aren't traded all that often, it's a little bit of a stretch. But if you're able to pull this off, you have similar cap space from Linus Ullmark. You have only 1 year left, and you have a guy that won the Vezina Trophy, not this past season, but the year prior to that with the Boston Bruins. So you're bringing in a guy that is proven to be able to, at the very least, play throughout the entirety of a regular season with a solid 1B. And that also opens the door a little bit more for Joel Blomqvist. That gives you a year, at least a little bit more time to say, all right, is he going to be a guy worth giving 1A status to? And you have that year to figure it out, because you can sign a backup and let Blomqvist work his way up through and see how close he can get this season. And if he's good enough, you can just move on from Linus Ullmark. Let him walk or trade him, whatever you need to do. But if he's not ready, you can extend Linus Ullmark. It gives you a little bit more leeway, especially if Blomqvist is going to be ready. You can open that up and maybe bring in a 1B. So I think that as far as the future is concerned, considering how the word I'm looking for is just unbalanced, Tristan Jarry has seemed over the last couple of seasons. It's all right, well, now it's the injury. Well, now he's not injured, but he's still struggling after January 1st for some reason, and really struggling after the All-Star break, and he lost his net to Alex Nedeljkovic. He's unbalanced. And at this stage of the Penguins organization, where they're trying to win Stanley Cups, but still trying to kind of shuffle and shift to a younger generation, you need somebody that's going to be a little bit more consistent in net. And Linus Ullmark has been that over the last couple of seasons for the Boston Bruins. Do I think the Penguins need more defense? Yeah, I do. Do I think Brady Shea would be a nice addition? Do I think it would be good to swap him out for Ryan Graves? I do. But I think the most significant move, and the move that's going to make the biggest impact of the three, is Tristan Jarry and Linus Ullmark being the switch.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I hear you out on a lot of those. I just also, the way goaltending can be voodoo. I want to see what, and this is going to be impossible to tell because at that point he'll have proven himself, and then it's one way or the other. I want to see what Linus Ullmark can do on a team that isn't the Bruins. Because he didn't look great in Buffalo, and again, bad team in front of him. But now he's got a really good team in front of him. Could it have just been that full swing of he went from a poor team to a really good team his numbers just kind of followed what was in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see what Linus Ullmark can do on one more team that kind of fits the vibe of, okay, this is what he can actually do.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd just be one more experimental year for him. And if it's the Penguins, well, then, I mean, that's a hell of a middle of the road team to kind of be like, oh, let's see what his real skill is.
Yeah.
You don't want to experiment with that, though. The Penguins don't need an experiment. I'm not calling the Vezina winner an experiment, by the way. I'm just saying I don't have full trust, even though he owns a Vezina trophy. That being said, stick him on a team like if he was to go behind Calgary and Linus Ullmark, see if he all of a sudden rebounds there, then okay, good. He's a good goalie and he's a great goalie. He's proven it. It's tough to see because it's the same conversation which by the way, here's a name we haven't brought up yet this summer, that happens with John Gibson every summer. Is he good, or is the team really bad in front of him, or is he bad? There's a lot of questions that go into John Gibson that we'll never know the answer to, straight up.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like John Gibson's leaving Southern California anytime soon. And honestly, I don't blame him. I'd like to live in Southern California and be a millionaire. But, at the end of the day, that's why I like Ullmark, I think, as well, though. It's like, yeah, you're going to take a risk. But at the same time, you're taking a risk with Tristan Jarry for 4 more years because this is a guy that has never shown it in the playoffs. And a guy that the last 2 seasons, one because of injury and one because he got the Hershey squirts and never got his net back because he wasn't good enough to warrant going back in for Alex Nedeljkovic. Like the last 2 years, Tristan Jarry has not been the guy down the stretch for one reason or other, and it's cost the Penguins a playoff spot. It's not the only reason, but it's certainly a reason, and I think that bringing in Ullmark instead 1 year, even if he's not the Vezina Trophy winner next year, I think that's a better bet. And then also you can always cut bait and try to find something else next offseason. That's why I think of the 3, if I could just wave a magic wand and have one of these 2 things happen, I'd rather have that happen because then you're not tied down to a goaltender that you have so many questions about for the next 4 years at a pretty substantial cap hit of over $5 million. But the one that we haven't talked about at all, for good reason. I mean, it only had 20% of the total vote, but the one that we haven't talked about is probably the most realistic. I saw some people on Twitter saying the same exact thing, which is why some people voted for this one, is because, well, a lot of people already expect Riley Smith to be traded. And at that point, the only thing that's holding this back from being a reality is, does Kyle Dubas change his mind and end up wanting to sign Tyler Bertuzzi? So what would you think of if they trade Riley Smith, which as of right now, a lot of people are calling an eventuality. We'll wait and see for that one. Mm-hmm. What would you think if they replaced him with a guy like Tyler Bertuzzi?
I mean, I don't want Tyler Bertuzzi. I don't want to see. I really don't want to see Riley Smith either. But at this point, I don't care for Tyler Bertuzzi on the Penguins. It's going to cost a ton of money, even though he probably shouldn't. He's going to warrant quite a big deal when he probably shouldn't. I mean, he underachieved for what it's worth. I mean, his numbers are kind of fine. He didn't play a ton last year, so it's hard to go off of that. But 43 points in 80 games with the Leafs. But he made $5.5 million. Is that sort of worth the price? Is 43 points worth $5.5 million to any team, let alone the Maple Leafs, who again just straight up disappointed? And I believe he 4 points in 7 games. So he kind of, I don't want to say he turned into a total pumpkin in the playoffs. The entire team kind of did. But he seemed to be a good playoff performer with Boston. But again, Boston. And they lost that series still. So I don't know. Tyler Bertuzzi is just a tough one to nail down. I think my opinion is I just don't want to wave a stick at that one.
Yeah, Bertuzzi's an interesting case because I feel like his stock was through the roof when he was with the Detroit Red Wings, especially after that season where he scored 30 goals and 62 points. And then, last season in 2022-23, he gets off to a slow start. The Red Wings decide, all right, we're going to end up trading him. He had some issues with health. And then he goes to Boston and everybody starts to kind of see him as a bottom 6 player. Whereas in Detroit, he was one of their top 3 players. It was Dylan Larkin, Anthony Mantha, and Tyler Bertuzzi. That was their core. And then they decided to change up their core, and it's worked out for them because, they add Alex DeBrincat, they add whoever they added, and they were close to a playoff spot, closer than they've been in some time this past season. But People forget how good Tyler Bertuzzi was, but then it comes to the same question of, was he that good because he was playing on a bad team and given all the opportunities? Power play one, top line minutes, all of that. I think what we saw last year with him in Toronto is what you can expect from Tyler Bertuzzi, and I think that's going to affect his contract this offseason. No, I wouldn't give Tyler Bertuzzi $6 million plus a year. I don't know if I'd give Tyler Bertuzzi $5 million plus a year. But also remember, he signed that $5.5 million contract on a 1-year deal. If you extend him out to 2 or 3 years, that number is going to come down, especially considering you saw what he finally was in a middle six role, which is where he's going to fit in. 80 games played, 21 goals, 43 points. He's still a 20 goal scorer in the National Hockey League. And I think that matched with the fact that he brings that little bit of snarl is what the Penguins are looking for. I wouldn't hate it if the price is right, and that's the biggest thing. You don't want to overpay Tyler Bertuzzi for a long time because he's shown you that while, yes, in this league, he can score 30 goals, it's more than likely that he's going to finish around 20. So you don't want to overpay for a guy like that. But as far as in general, switching out Riley Smith for Tyler Bertuzzi, I think that would be, at the end of the day, even if it's the same number as far as the cap hit is concerned, at the end of the day, I think it would end up being a net positive for the Penguins because I think he brings more than Riley Smith brought last season.
Yeah, that would at least be the positive of it. That he'll bring maybe at bare minimum a little more snarl, a little more oomph to the lineup. And even if none of what I just said involves offense or playing the game of hockey, there's something a little extra that he brings that Riley Smith just wasn't. And Riley Smith wasn't bringing a ton. And what is hilarious about Bertuzzi's stat sheet here, aside from he only had 8 goals last season and was yet still one of the top trade prospects in the league. Okay, his cap seems to be 21 goals. That's it. He hit 30 once, and every other season where he exceeded, about 70 games or so, 21 goals is the maximum. 2018-19, 21 goals. 19-20, cut short season, 21 goals. Last year in 80 games, 21 goals. Hilarious.
I mean, 21 goals is more than Riley Smith scored last year. So
that's
why I'm like, if he caps out at 21 goals and brings a little bit more of that hard to play against pest type style, I'll take it. Right. And again, is he my top option to go and be the Penguins' next top 6, middle 6 type of winger? No, he's not my top option, but would definitely take him over Riley Smith. And I can see why 20% of voters said, yeah, that would probably be what I'd vote for, because a lot of people are saying trading Tristan Jarry and Ryan Graves is very
more of a
much
splash.
Yeah, it's very much on the outside of reality, whereas trading Riley Smith, like I mentioned, some people are calling it eventuality. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. June is going to be an interesting month simply because really a lot of the moves are going to have to happen this week because the Stanley Cup final begins on Saturday, I believe. And once the Stanley Cup final begins, news is not that news is, flying off the shelf right now, but news is very much kept to a minimum during the Stanley Cup final.
Teams might not have a choice but to ignore that. I don't know what other things need to happen around the league still. But the last possible day of the Stanley Cup final, if I'm remembering correctly, Game 7 would be the 24th. The draft is like 3 days later. And not everyone's going to try and force their business in 3 days.
Yeah, but nothing big's going to happen. Like trading a Tristan Jarry or Ryan Graves is unlikely to happen during the Stanley Cup final.
No, that'll happen at the draft if it happens. But I'm just thinking like the Penguins might not have a choice but to announce a coaching hire like during Game 4 or something.
Well, yeah, but an assistant coaching hire is a drop in the bucket to the NHL. Depending on who the name is.
Exactly.
Depending on who the name is. But, hey, that's something that we will continue to monitor here at the Tip of the Iceberg podcast. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Inside the Penguins. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Or if you prefer the podcast version, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts just by searching Tip of the Iceberg. But that's it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.